It's been quite extraordinary. You're this big thinker. Can you explain it all? I mean, is it explainable? The appeal of
I don't think
Donald
it's
Trump?
even remotely explainable. One of my favorite adages is the legal adage, difficult cases make bad law. In other words, never try to generalize from extraordinary events. I think that's what this is. I think people who try to extract some kind of broader lesson about the state of American society from this election are doing themselves a disservice. He slips through, he catches a wave. For some reason, a certain percentage of the population, is momentarily blind to his faults, and Trump happens to run against a historically unpopular candidate. I mean, it is almost never the case that you have a candidate for a major party like Hillary Clinton, who generates so little enthusiasm amongst her own supporters. And so Trump caught 10 different breaks. This is not going to happen again. And, this is such a confluence of extraordinary one-offs that I'm reluctant to kind of read into it too deeply.
What do you read into the dislikability, it seems, the unlikability of Hillary Clinton? Why is she seen as so unlikable?
I think people spend way too much time coming up with overly complicated reasons. I think it's very simple. I think she's a woman. People had a mental notion, a pre-existing mental notion of what a female candidate would look like, and she doesn't look like it. In other words, she is being penalized for having a series of traits that people find unacceptable in a woman.
So it's just that she's a woman?
Well, it's not. It's more specific than that. I think there are a set of traits that women are in leadership positions are allowed to have, and other traits they are not allowed to have. It is very difficult for society to accept an ambitious woman, an openly ambitious woman. That's problem number one. That she doesn't try and hide her desire for power under her hat. And we continue to expect that women have a kind of modesty in positions of authority. It makes it easier for us to accept the fact that they have moved into a man's realm. She doesn't want to play that game. What happens? She gets penalized. Because remember, if you think people say, well, this is about her dishonesty or Benghazi or the emails. No. This predated that stuff by 20 years. Hillary has been hated from the instant she made it into the White House. There were trumped up scandals about her when she was the first lady when Clinton was first elected. This goes back, 2 decades now, and it has to do with the fact that she doesn't fit the mold, right? And that is to me the most disturbing lesson about this election is that the United States is a good deal less open to women in positions of power than it would like to pretend that it is.
You said that you don't want to categorize exactly what's happened to Donald Trump, or you don't want to simplify it, but there is this whole theme of distrust and the elites letting people down. Do you think that helps explain his popularity?
Well, yes and no. First of all, the idea that he's not an elite is so comic. But no, one guy is the child of privilege who grew up in a multimillionaire household and has had every advantage handed to him on a silver platter. The other candidate, is a woman who, came from the most ordinary of circumstances. Who is the elite in this battle? One woman happens to be married to a man who previously was president of the United States. Yes, but I don't know why that somehow catapults you out of the category of someone who made your way up from the bottom to someone who is part of a kind of permanent elite.
He's also angry and foul-mouthed and feels free to say whatever the heck he wants, and that seems to appeal. What is that speaking to?
Well, it codes as honesty. It doesn't code as honesty, it codes as authenticity. We are in a particular political moment where people have come to prize the notion that someone is themselves, their true self, an unfiltered, straightforward, uncalculating self. That, maybe it's a function of the internet age, I have no idea. But that seems to be something that is a valued commodity in a candidate right now in the United States, and he is certainly that. So to the extent that he continues to be a boor and a pig, he satisfies that criterion, right? It is the very fact that he is so offensive that generates enthusiasm among his followers, because by
But
being
how do you explain that?
because by being offensive.
But that, I can understand a small percentage of people who want authenticity, but there's more to authenticity than that, isn't
Well,
there?
small. I mean, I think probably, if I had to guess, I would say 20% of the American voting population is enthusiastic about Trump. I don't know whether it's
But
larger
he
than
does
that.
so much better than that in the
Well,
polls.
remember, because there are a lot of Republicans who are voting while holding their nose. So it's important not to overstate the level of personal enthusiasm he generates. In many cases, there are people who hate Hillary so much they are willing to tolerate a Donald Trump in the office, or people who have agendas that are connected to a Republican winning, but aren't, who are concerned about the Supreme Court or concerned about abortion or whatever. So there are lots of people who are voting for him despite disliking him. So I would think the number of people who actually would like to share a meal with him, I would put that at probably 15 or 20% of the population, no more than that.
If Hillary Clinton wins, what will happen? Not in terms of world peace, but in terms of, you say that people hate her because she's not the kind of woman that they would like to
The
see.
Republicans
So
in
what's going to
Congress
happen?
will start an investigation of her on day one, which will only end when she leaves office 4 years later. The forecast for the next 4 years is just stalemate. Their hatred will not be satiated by a Hillary Clinton victory. It will be enhanced. So they're just going to keep, for 20 years they've been coming after this woman, and they're going to keep coming after her. I mean, and so it will result in some kind of political paralysis, I'm sure.
And if Donald Trump wins?
Well, I think he'll be in jail within a year. We've got the Trump University fraud case. We probably have criminal charges coming out of his charitable donation. We've got all of the Russian ties we don't know much about. I mean, he's got so many legal problems. I suspect he will spend the next few years huddled with his lawyers.
And yet we're not talking about that in this last few days of the election. We're talking about the emails.
Welcome to the great mystery of the American election in 2016.
Is that a media thing, or what is that?
I read something yesterday that someone did an analysis of major media coverage and discovered that media coverage of Hillary's emails is greater than coverage of all other policy questions in the 2016 election combined. So you tell me whether that's a media problem.
Well, it sounds like you're saying yes.
Oh, it most certainly is. Yes, it most certainly is. I mean, the level of extraordinary enthusiasm for continued dissection of this email issue among the American media classes is so baffling to me.
How much is Barack Obama, having been in power for 8 years, a factor in this election?
Well, I had an episode of my podcast, Revisionist History, which everyone should listen to, where it was the very first episode, and it was about an idea called moral licensing. And it was this explanation of this idea, which is there's a good deal of very fascinating psychological research into, which is that notion that when people do something generous or open-minded or kind, they then give themselves license to do the opposite. Having taken the extraordinary step of electing a black man as president of the United States, Americans feel free to indulge every dark impulse inside their hearts. Why? Because they think they've proven to the world how open-minded they are. They're like, look, we're the ones who let a black guy into the White House, so now they feel free to say and do the most unspeakable things towards a woman. I think there's something to that theory in this election case. That's why I started my podcast with that episode, because I felt like, although in the podcast I talk about a painter from the 19th century, but my point was, and I don't think I mentioned Hillary once in the podcast, but it was about Hillary. It was about, these are the dynamics of discrimination, of prejudice, that it's not all in one direction. It's one step forward, 2 steps back.
So there is more racism now because a black man was president?
I think so. I think what that does, this is what moral licensing theory would suggest, that the a generous and liberal act opens the door to a kind of backlash, allows people to indulge their darker selves.
So then what happens?
We have to take a short break, but when we come back, there's been a lot of talk of potential unrest after the election, and Gladwell has some perhaps surprising thoughts on that.
So then what happens after the election? I mean, people, you see them tearing at each other, physically, verbally abusive. How divided is this country now? And can it be put back together?
I think it can. Like I said, I don't know whether these impulses are permanent. I think we'll have a rough 4 years. But I have every confidence that, these are not unknown, these moments of great rancor and division. And invariably they ebb and people come back to their senses.
You think that'll happen? People are so pitted against each other, it seems,
Yeah.
right now.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm an optimist. So right now the state of American politics is people have chosen to forget their similarities and to overemphasize their differences. That you can only do that for so long before you run it back up to the fact that even your greatest political enemies have more in common with you than they disagree with you, right? The crazy fact is that if I plucked a Republican from the streets of Brooklyn, where we are right now, assuming you could find one, because there are really no Republicans in Brooklyn, but assuming we found one and we put them next to a Democrat and we interviewed them each for 3 hours, the list of things that they saw eye to eye on would be as long as my arm. The list of things, there would be 5 things they disagreed on, right? It's like crazy, but they only want to talk about the 5. They don't want to talk about the fact that they actually, pretty much see eye to eye on most things that matter, right? Well, we're just in a moment where people just want to talk about the 5. Well, they'll come back to the 500 things they have in common in due course.
So you don't see civil war, revolution, all the dire prophecies that we're hearing now?
No, I don't see that.
Thanks so much, Malcolm. Really
Good.
nice to meet you.
Thank you.